response to yourselves through your sectors, and we will follow up on some of the issues that you've raised questions about for interventions and follow-ups. Your cooperation during this webinar is greatly appreciated, and I therefore would like to invite our Minister, Minister Maite Nkoana-Mashabane, for her opening statement. For technical support, I will request Charlene that you just check and we ensure that Minister is in a position to address us.
Sibo? Yeah, the problem is not. Sure. Sure. Program Director, can you hear me?
I can.
We've just been advised by the Chief of Staff that Minister is on a call with the President at the moment. Please, can we ask the to continue, and Minister will join us shortly. Thank you.
Noted. I will therefore afford the Deputy Minister, Professor Hlengiwe Mkhize, to address us in ensuring accessibility, but also upholding the rights of persons with disabilities from a COVID-19 response. Deputy Minister, over to you. Deputy Minister, may I request you unmute yourself? We can't hear you.
Am I okay? Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible, Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I had acknowledged you, Acting DG. I also I was just at the point where I was greeting the Honorable Deputy Minister, Honorable Nokuzola Chapha. Of course, I want to also acknowledge all the speakers as identified by the department, COVID-19 and persons with disabilities in Africa, Mr. A.K. Dube, UN Policy Brief and Guidance on COVID-19 and Persons with Disability, UN OHCHR, Mr. Jan Pokwa, leaders of organizations of persons with disabilities, and members of the Presidential Working Group, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I still want to acknowledge Minister Maite Nkoana-Mashabane, and just to build on what the acting DG has said, we are holding this high-level meeting in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, during which our brothers, sisters, wives, and husbands from our communities are getting infected on a daily basis, while unfortunately others are recovering. While others are recovering, unfortunately others are dying. This virus has sharply brought to the fore inequalities in society, abject poverty, and unacceptable levels of unemployment. I need to reiterate that we have one of the progressive constitutions in the world, which entrenches the equality clause. Also, our white paper on persons with disability compels us to build a disability inclusive South Africa, and also to ensure that we leave no one behind by adopting a universal access and design approach. I must also add that our sixth administration was given a clear mandate during the State of the Nation address in June 2019, when His Excellency, our President, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa said, if we are to successfully address the challenge of poverty across society, we need to provide skills and create economic opportunities for persons with disabilities. Also ensure their inclusion in the education system. Hence, the coordination of disability was moved to the center of government, which is the Presidency. A lifetime opportunity to come up with a sustainable inclusion of persons with disability rights program is beginning to emerge within the district development model, whereby all spheres of government, different departments, NGOs have an opportunity to entrench an ideal inclusive rights program. We have an opportunity to mainstream disability issues and also to monitor through accurate, aggregated, localized data progress on different aspects of a person's life. Once we have accurate data, we could, for instance, look at our education system and say our education system has completely opened the doors of learning. Each and every child is at school at the right age of entry. Teachers are equipped to manage and support each learner. The learner has the right assistive gadgets, but if entry to the building is still a challenge, or school transport a challenge, then we need to isolate what is a stumbling block. The ILO in 2009 estimated that South Africa has about 7% loss of GDP due to the exclusion of persons with disabilities from workplace. In 2013, figures translates to a loss of 318 billion rand to South Africa's gross domestic products. So basically, we cannot claim easy gains. We still have a serious challenge when it comes to inclusive rights. I just want to share with you in my concluding remarks the best articulation of accessibility as a challenge, as written by Eddie Ndopi, who is known to many of you as a UN Ambassador for Sustainable Development Goals. To mark Global Accessibility Awareness Day, Eddie wrote an opinion piece for Time whereby he invites us all to reimagine accessibility beyond the logic of compliance. In his own words, Eddie is a wheelchair user in perpetual pursuit of barrier-free life. He believes that when activists like themselves talk about accessibility, they are calling for transformation in its totality, not merely ticking one box. He emphatically say a conception of accessibility that centers on the bureaucratic administration of disabled bodies is not a conception of accessibility that advances our liberation. On the contrary, it is one that forecloses it. I thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I can see Minister is already moving in. I'd like to check Minister, are you ready because you've just joined, or should we move to the Deputy Minister?
I'm ready.
Okay, Minister, welcome, and may I afford you the opportunity to address the nation and persons with disabilities.
Thank you. Program Director and our acting DG, Honorable Deputy Minister Professor Mkhize, Honorable Deputy Minister Kapa, distinguished representatives and persons with disabilities in South Africa and across the African continent, representatives of the UN development partners from all over, distinguished leaders and of organizations and persons with disabilities, members of the Presidential Working Group on Disabilities, members of the committee, of the Portfolio Committee, our Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, government officials led by our acting DG, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Dumelang. It is my honor and that of all the leadership in the department to welcome you to this very important webinar meeting on upholding the rights of persons with disabilities under the overarching theme, persons with disabilities and COVID-19 South Africa. May I also hasten to say we bring greetings to all of you from our president, who we have just had a word with him now, who is very, very happy that while he was reminding us that we should keep this on this track, we had an opportunity to chat to him just a few minutes before we start this webinar. You will recall that the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities has been tasked with the overall mandate to drive the transformative national agenda that will create a South Africa which is truly inclusive of persons with disabilities. Sadly, this invisible enemy of the COVID-19 pandemic continues to threaten the lives and the livelihoods of humankind. The worst impact of the pandemic is certainly felt by the most vulnerable of our people. In this regard, persons with disabilities are more likely to be affected by poverty, experience higher rates of violence, neglect and abuse during these times. As government, we need to put persons with disabilities at the center of our response to COVID-19. All recovery efforts need to include engagements and consultations with the sector. They know more about the sector. That's why they keep saying to us, nothing about us without us. Nothing about them without them. We will utilize the valuable experience offered by persons with disabilities in order to thrive during this difficult period. I believe that looking to the future, we have a unique opportunity to design and implement more inclusive and accessible societies to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It is my conviction that when we secure the rights of the persons with disabilities, we are investing in our common future. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, the department which I lead is responsible for monitoring compliance with the rights of persons with disabilities during a national state of disaster and lockdown. Working together, we can make sure we leave no one behind. We are gathered here today to conduct an interface dialogue as a direct result of the disability-specific interventions undertaken by both government and civil society across the services and infrastructure within the COVID-19 responses. South Africa is a signatory of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Sendal Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Our cabinet has approved the white paper on the rights of persons with disabilities and implementation metrics in 2015. All the above instruments emphasize the protection and the safety of the persons with disabilities and the situation of risk and humanitarian emergencies. I believe that all national state of disaster plans and lockdown period plans should ensure the inclusion of persons with disabilities. Government interventions at the policy and legislative levels included the implementation of reasonable accommodation measures for the protection of the safety and the safety of the persons with disabilities during the national state of disaster for the duration of the lockdown. May it go beyond just the period of the lockdown. The guidelines issued by the department provided clear indications and indicators on the mainstreaming of the disability measures in the activities, services, projects, and programs of COVID-19 responses. A reporting template is being developed to track the spending of the 500 billion fiscal support packages that include spending towards COVID-19 priorities. The template is meant to track the spending in respect of women, youth, and persons with disabilities to various aspects of fiscal response packages. Some of these measures included in the regulations of the Disaster Management Act. Alert levels were done following wide consultations with disabilities sector. The clarion call of persons with disabilities is that which I had already raised earlier on, that we mustn't try and do things for them without them. And government, we take that very seriously. Nothing about us without us. I have my colleagues in the Department of Social Development, Health and Basic Education on all issues raised in the letters you sent to the department and how this impacts you in your private and public spaces during the lockdown period. In this context, specific measures are in place to consider universal design and reasonable accommodation as legal requirements and obligations regarding screening, testing, and quarantine sites for accessibility purposes. Furthermore, training of staff in residential facilities for persons with disabilities has been conducted, and inclusion of persons with disabilities in the distribution of food parcels. This is done through a knock and drop system at their homes and places of residence, and that helps mitigate the circumstances that may lead to starvation. And the Department of Social Development has led these processes actively and effectively. In addition, the specific days of disbursement for disability grants and care dependency grants for children with disabilities have been arranged with the Department of Social Development. Ladies and gentlemen, key priorities for COVID-19 related activities have been concluded. Consensus has been reached through this webinar to include those interventions in the scope of COVID-19 programs and services. Essential information is provided for the government and communication systems GCIS page. The page is decided to disability to support efforts across government to include persons with disabilities in the work, all the streams of the national government and the command center is undertaking, National Command Center is undertaking. Accordingly, all organizations are invited to send content through that page, as it can assist all persons with disabilities during this difficult time. Acting Director General, I think we should also consider talking to the GCIS that they also use all our people's languages, not just the Queen's language. The gender tracking metrics include women with disabilities and concerns and gender-based violence measures to protect and ensure their safety. The department is also developing a disability tracking tool to ensure that all COVID-19 priorities are monitored closely. The Department of Basic Education made resource materials to support learners with autism. The materials was shared with provincial education departments, parents, and disability formations as a stopgap mechanism. We commend Autism South Africa for offering counseling services to parents and caregivers. A few minutes ago, as we were about to start this, President was re-emphasizing how important it is that people who work in support services needed to be brought in and be paid now, starting with social workers. So if we are aware of any sector, any corner of the country where there's still a municipality that does not have a social worker, or that people need, or a corner where we need special care for autism, for example, we need to knock the door of this department as soon as we finish this webinar, so that I can quickly say, here is another one that we said we will take care of. Parents and caregivers have been provided with the relevant contact details for Autism South Africa through the Department of Social Development, Basic Education, and GCIS, respectively. Dear colleagues, services and materials for learners who are blind have been made available in collaboration with Blind SA. We commend the organization for this support. Provincial departments also had their own support materials catering for learners with various disabilities. This first webinar provides persons with disabilities with a platform to strengthen constructive engagements with various stakeholders within the work streams process of the National Command Center in order to improve disability inclusion in the COVID-19 Disability Response Plan. The key priorities include, amongst others, COVID-19 interventions and legislative amendments. The provision of services include access to information and communication, provision of essential goods such as sanitary dignity packs, provision of personal protective equipment and food parcels in the various centers across our provinces. Disability mainstreaming and inclusion in the COVID-19 response plan has complied with the World Health Organization's protocols on disability-related matters. Specific steps have been taken by the department to ensure that regulatory disability-specific aspects of the National Disaster Management Act 57 of 2002 mainstream disability from a human rights and developmental perspective. The department also deployed senior officials in the public health containment, economic, legal, and social impact work streams to ensure disability inclusion. This work stream feeds into various national joint committees to support the work of the National Corona Command Council. Ladies and gentlemen, I will engage persons with disabilities in the arts and creative industries who have sharply raised their concerns in order to find an urgent solution to assist during this lockdown period. The department has contributed immensely in providing guidance in the directions of the different departments for purposes of managing disability mainstreaming under strict adherence to regulations. Within the economic sector, the department has placed the emphasis of the employment and labor matters affecting persons with disabilities. The economic opportunities are currently available and include, but not limited to, disaster relief opportunities, tax relief measures, as well as economic interventions in the SMME business development for persons with disabilities. The department is also providing South Africans with sign language interpretation for the deaf and hard of hearing impairment communities in all media briefings by all ministers and the president for access for information purposes. I therefore want to make the direct appeal to the South African public to create partnerships that can work towards protection and safety of persons with disabilities. Caregivers for persons with disabilities have been declared as essential services as one of the examples of the interventions of the general public. Furthermore, it is important to allow persons with disabilities to have a voice in the decision-making process that affects them directly for purposes of self-representation. In conclusion, the department will arrange extra webinars for all levels of the lockdown to consult persons with disabilities and strengthen accountability by government as a duty bearer. I have also instructed my officials to ensure that proper and immediate consultations where it is necessary. Finally, the progressive realization of specific rights will be focused on specific exceptions in the regulations which affect persons with disabilities on a daily basis within the available resources of the state. Let's continue working together to ensure a disability inclusive society. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your address. That was a high-level COVID-19 government-wide response by the Minister. I just want to check if the Deputy Minister for Small Business and Development is already connected. I know she was struggling at some point. Deputy Minister, are you there?
Director, I don't think as.
Okay. Let us then proceed.
Fine, yeah.
Okay, as soon as she's connected, you will just alert me. Let us proceed and take some lessons learned from international and continental responses, as well as experiences that we need to hear about. And that will be Ms. Mkhize from the University of Pretoria. She will be addressing us on COVID-19 Disability Rights Monitor South Africa. Over to Mkhize.
Thank you so much, Program Director, and good morning to Minister Mashabane, to Professor Mkhize, distinguished guests, all protocols observed. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the findings from the Disability Rights COVID Monitoring Initiative. In order to contextualize my presentation, the Center for Human Rights, which is based at the University of Pretoria, together with 5 other international disability rights organizations, started launched a global survey in mid-April this year to monitor the impact of COVID-19 and related responses by governments on persons with disabilities. So at the core of this monitoring initiative is trying to ensure that as governments are trying to grapple with COVID-19 and its different implications, that they remain conscious and inclusive of persons with disabilities. To date, we've received over 1,400 responses worldwide from over 56 countries. Most of the respondents have been persons with disabilities, representative organizations, and families of persons with disabilities. The survey is still ongoing, and findings will be publicly made available on the Disability Rights Monitoring website. So what I'm sharing today is some of the initial findings that are coming out from South Africa, bearing in mind that the survey is still ongoing, and that it's also important to look at other ongoing surveys that are being done in the country in order to create a more holistic picture. So one of the things the survey tried to establish was whether persons with disabilities in South Africa were accessing disability-specific services. So were they able to access rehabilitation services and therapies, as well as general services? We were also trying to understand
It's the same link. Just please assist me. I'm dealing with so many things here. I don't know why Zanile comes with
Can I come in, Shalon? Shalon, please mute your mic.
apologies, colleagues.
Can I continue? Okay. Yes. So we're also trying to understand whether persons with disabilities were also able to access both formal and informal support services. So whether it's personal assistance or simply, a friend or community member in their day-to-day activities, if they needed such assistance during this period. So what's come out from this initial findings is that certain specific, disability-specific healthcare services have become harder for persons with disabilities to access. So, for instance, one organization reported that many people with epilepsy are struggling to access medication, particularly in public health sectors. There was also a concern that only emergency-related therapy was available in state hospitals during lockdown. And so persons with disabilities, unless you're on medical aid, you would struggle to access occupational therapy, physical therapy, and other therapies. So one mother said that, my 9-year-old doesn't have access to a therapist and has become quite aggressive and violent since the lockdown. There's also been, of course, concerns around public transport and the difficulties people are experiencing in using public transport to get to hospitals and clinics during this time, particularly in rural areas. Another was that center
information that is accurate. Thank you very much for it. Thank you for mentioning
Fellow colleagues,
Secondly,
fellow colleagues that are speakers, please mute your mics.
can you please mute your thing?
Fellow colleagues, I explained earlier on some of our protocols on how we are going to engage. Earlier on, if you were not part of us, kindly mute your mask when you are not speaking, and when it's your turn to speak, you then unmute. My apologies to the speaker. You may proceed.
Thank you. So another concern that was brought up was that centers where persons with disabilities could go to fix their wheelchairs or other assistance devices were closed during level 5, and though some had been reopened and were operational, there were a number that still were not operational. There were concerns raised around whether the medical staff was prepared to deal with patients with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities who might present with symptoms of COVID-19 or need treatment. So one mother was quite worried that, would the person assisting be able to know how to handle her son who had autism and is nonverbal? Do they have the requisite training to do so? There was also a number of fears that were being expressed. A fear that perhaps persons with disabilities would be deprioritized when it came to accessing, critical care such as ventilators. So there was a pervasive fear that kept coming up from some of the respondents that, if it came to choosing who would leave and who would not, that persons with disabilities might be the ones, who would not leave. So concerns around the Western Cape triage guidelines and the critical care decision too. But there has been acknowledged that, access to other services has been enhanced because of the increase in the disability grants. And but a general consensus was that there's need for greater needs assessment, and that in terms of support, that I think there was a lot of care workers who were not quite clear on how to go about getting the permits that they would need to continue to provide sort of informal care for persons with disabilities. So one of the other issues that we were trying to also understand was to establish what measures had government adopted to protect the life, health, and security of persons with disabilities in institutions, and whether those measures were sufficient. What we found from the survey was that that government had restricted or banned visits by family members or friends to institutions, that there were restrictions or in some cases bans for persons with disabilities leaving institutions, and that there was restrictions around new admissions into institutions unless in exceptional circumstances. A number of people, the majority of people who responded to the survey weren't aware of any additional measures beyond these measures that government were taking to ensure the right to life and safety and health of persons in institutions. There were some respondents from people who work in institutions, and they were quite worried about the approach that government was taking, that it was a bit inconsistent, so that different provincial governments were providing different levels of support to different institutions. So when we're looking at institutions, we were speaking quite broadly. So old people's homes, children's homes, psychiatric homes, homeless shelters. So there was that concern came up. In some instances, government was providing, PPEs to institutions, but then in other instances, there were institutions that were not getting these from government. There was also a number of hospices, children's homes who said they needed additional support from government, but were struggling to get it. So in particular, one such home said that social workers are overloaded with work. They cannot get around to helping children with disabilities in facilities. And so they would need government's help to ensure that children in these facilities have access to a social worker. And I think it's great that the minister has already spoken a bit to this. There's also a concern that support for care care centers in rural areas is lacking, so that a lot of the support they're seeing is in urban areas and not in rural areas. Another concern that came out was that there was need for greater guidance to be provided to institutions where persons with disabilities are. So for the greater part that institutions had been given general guidelines, COVID-19 guidelines to adhere to without necessarily thinking of some of the reasonable accommodations that would be needed and the adjustments that would be needed in the context of persons with disabilities, and that it would be helpful for governments to provide more guidelines. One other concern that also came up was the issue that if families cannot see their family members with disabilities during this time, is government actually monitoring the situation of persons with disabilities in institutions? So we've seen in other countries, such as France, that the rate of infection in institutions was quite high. And so there was really concern that who is monitoring to make sure that persons with disabilities in institutions are being provided with, the right care that they might need at this time. In terms of access to information, the majority of respondents actually felt that they were receiving adequate information around COVID-19, how to prevent it, and some of the government's responses, particularly emergency measures in place. And that information was, to a greater degree, being afforded, in accessible formats. But this was, of course, not the case in all the circumstances. So some of the concerns were that persons with disabilities were not getting all the information. They were only getting some of the information. And this is particularly, when some of the changes in regulations, and given the fast pace at which some of these decisions are being made, that this was not always communicated timeously. And so persons with disabilities were not always up to date with sort of the latest changes. There was also a concern that certain persons with disabilities may not be getting all the information, particularly those in institutions, that the role of disseminating information had been left to institution management without necessarily monitoring to ensure that persons with disabilities in institutions are sufficiently made aware of the situation and on a continuous basis. There was also a lot of the specific information that some of the members of the disability community wanted to know that they felt was not clearly communicated. So issues like what is the situation of persons with disabilities in homeless shelters, more information about what is being done for learners with disabilities, what is happening in psychiatric health settings. So these were some of what the community wanted to know, and they're not always getting information around. So to conclude, and I think the report will be available online, and you'll be able to see the details. But in terms of support to families of persons with disabilities, family members, one of the things highlighted was, yes, I think that the financial grants do really play a role in alleviating the situation, but certainly that there was more need. There's a need to support families with persons with disabilities more. So people were talking about the need for greater emotional support, but also in situations where perhaps a family member is an essential worker, and they don't then have anyone to leave their children with because they have to go to work, but their children or their child has a disability and they can't simply leave the child with anyone. So there was need for government to look at such situations on how to help such families. I think there was a mother with 3 children with autism who said, she was an essential worker, had to go to work, and had to leave her children in the care of another older child. And this was really not a good situation. Um, but yes, I think families are also really thinking around what happens when schools open, and really concerned that is the Ministry of Education thinking through how to protect children with disabilities, perhaps in instances where it's not easy to communicate some of the messages to those particular children or groups of children, and how do we keep them safe? In terms of access to independent complaints mechanisms, that a number of respondents say they were aware of independent complaints mechanisms where they could let their concerns be heard, um, um, but that they were often deterred from using them because they said, in terms of hotlines and WhatsApp messaging, that they can't seem to get through to anyone, and when they do get through, they do, that their issues are not always responded to. So that in a way has discouraged people from communicating. But there was also a call to for the South African Human Rights Commission to take a more active role in terms of monitoring the situation. In terms of really some of the cross-cutting issues that came out, as some of them were that many persons with disabilities are beneficiaries of road accident funds, and that the road accident funds monthly payments have not been made because it's closed. The need for greater consultation with persons with disabilities and involvement in decision making, the needs to shift focus not only on persons with disabilities in urban areas and but also in rural areas. Yes, so I think one last comment that was made was that it's really important that persons with disabilities are involved. You know, also in sort of the emergency responses on COVID-19. So they want to be involved as community workers and all these other opportunities to help, to help in combating this, and not only to be seen as in need of protection and care, but also to be seen in the front lines of helping to fight this pandemic. So I will stop there, and like I said, I think this is really just a small snapshot into some of what we've found so far, and that I think in the coming weeks we'll be able to build a larger picture collectively on where are some of the gaps in protection. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mkhize. It is often said the best evaluator of the service is the service user. We will make sure that as soon as your report is ready, that it is shared with the relevant departments so that it informs the interventions that they are already working on and improve some of those areas of development as well. Issues that are of urgency to us, that are quick wins, it's the whole issue of the permits. We will immediately address the issue of the permit with the relevant departments, in particular social development, and if it does affect health, because I do know that they do provide responses on the ground, we will address that through those ministries and our own minister's office. Can I just check? I'm informed that the Deputy Minister is already connected. Deputy Minister from the Department of Small Business, Umama Rosemary Noguzola Kappa, are you available? Deputy Minister?
Deputy Minister is in.
Okay, Deputy Minister, over to you. Address us in terms of economic COVID-19 responses for persons with disabilities. I hand over to you, Deputy Minister.
Perhaps the Deputy Minister needs to unmute mic.
Minister, if you can hear us, kindly unmute your mic. Whilst Deputy Minister is being assisted, maybe in the interest of time, can we then move to the UN policy brief and guidance on COVID-19 and persons with disabilities? Mr. Jean Fokwa, and may I plead that we stick to the 10 minutes that has been allocated to us as speakers. I thank you. Mr. Fokwa.
Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Fokwa. Address us on UN policy brief and guidance on COVID-19 and persons with disabilities.
I'm sorry to promote this guy. I don't know.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madam Program Director, Minister Mashabane. All protocol observed.
Small business development. She was supposed to speak. Oh, there you go. She's joined now.
Sorry, Shalan, please mute your mic.
Apologies. Apologies.
You may proceed, sir.
Thank you so much, Madam Program Director. My name is Jean Fokwa. I work for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the regional office in Southern Africa that covers 14 countries in Southern Africa. And I am going to do a presentation on a policy brief that has been put forward by the UN Secretary General titled A Disability Inclusive Response to COVID-19. And the purpose of the policy brief is to provide some relevant guidance to states and other relevant stakeholders on how to ensure that disability issues are integrated into a response of COVID-19. As we all know, COVID-19 is not simply a health crisis. It is attacking societies at their core. The response is feeding on pre-existing social and economic inequalities associated with disability, and it is also threatening to exacerbate these inequalities. So the essence of this policy brief is to provide guidance to states on how to address issues concerning rights of persons with disability. And if we look at the brief, it talks about the need for states to adopt a human rights-based approach to ensure that persons with disabilities are not left behind, as indicated in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability that South Africa is a state party to, and also the Agenda 2030. It also talks about the need for states to mainstream disability in COVID-19 plans and efforts, which means that all efforts, all plans, all programs that states are putting in place to address COVID-19 should mainstream the rights of persons with disabilities. The policy also talks about the need to ensure that states put in place targeted measures to complement disability mainstreaming and to address specific requirements of the rights of persons with disability. As we all know, when we talk about non-discrimination, this is the core of human rights. And the policy also talks about the need to ensure that when addressing COVID-19, states should ensure that there should be non-discrimination and there should be reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. It also talks about the need for participation, which has been articulated as well by other speakers, that there is a need for inclusion and consultation with persons with disabilities and their representatives organizations in the design and implementation of COVID-19 measures. And we have heard so much about the slogan that nothing about us without us. And that is one point that has also been highlighted in the policy. The policy also talks about the need for states to put in place certain exceptions in terms of restriction of movement, because we have some persons with disabilities that may not be able to cope well with the lockdown, for example, persons with autism. So certain exceptions should be put in place as well. The policy also talks about the need for accessibility of services, information, and communication, which I am not going to labor so much on because other speakers have already articulated on this point. But one point that is very key in the policy is data collection and disaggregation by disability. We have to be able to address the rights of persons with disability, the needs of persons with disability in the COVID-19 response. It is very, very important for us to be able to collect disaggregated data that is going to inform our interventions. The policy also talks about the need to prioritize persons with disability at greater risk, including those in institutions, those that are homeless, those in prison, and those that already have high pre-existing health conditions. These are some of the points that we need to also take into consideration. If you look at the policy, it also put forward some recommendations on a sectorial basis, and I'm going to touch on some of them as well. In relation to health, it talks about the need for states to ensure that public information is accessible to all persons with disabilities, and for states to ensure that they implement disability inclusive protective measures against COVID-19. For example, the distribution of personal protective equipment to persons with disabilities need to be tailored to their disabilities. For example, given that masks make it impossible to read lips or to see facial expression, persons with hearing disability will find it difficult to read facial expressions. So it is important that instead of giving a mask, they are given face shields. It is also important to review health protocols to ensure that persons with disability do not face discrimination when accessing treatment and also in the allocation of resources. The second sector that I will touch on is in relation to support services. Under support services, it is important for states to ensure continuity of support services, including under lockdown, and certain exceptions have to be put in place. And as it was highlighted by the previous speakers, there's a need to expand community support for persons with disabilities. The next sector that I'm going to look at is what the previous speaker also talked about, protecting persons with disabilities in institutional setting. It is very important for states to prepare institutions to prevent and respond to potential infections, provide emergency and additional resources, and if possible, reduce the number of people with disabilities within these institutions, because this is also going to help to safeguard them from infection. The next point that I'm going to look at is in relation to education. It talks about the need to ensure that when distance learning measures are put in place, it should take into consideration the rights of persons with disabilities, and to also ensure that school programs should integrate the rights of persons with disabilities. So I'm going to end at this stage, but I just want to indicate that we have shared this policy with the government, and we have also shared the policy with other stakeholders. And we are very pleased with the information that we are also receiving from the government on some of the measures that have been taken that are already in line with the policy brief. And we hope that we are going to continue to work in a consistent manner to ensure that the policy brief guides our work in terms of addressing rights of persons with disability in the COVID response. Thank you so much.
Deputy Minister, you are in. The program director has just lost him connection. Deputy Minister Mkhize. Deputy Minister Kappa.
Yes, sir, I'm available.
Do you hear us? We hear you. The program director has temporarily lost connection. Please, may you proceed.
Thank you very much. Can I now greet all the guests that are there? And I now disadvantage that I won't be able to acknowledge you according to your positions because I didn't have that privilege. Thank you very much. My role here is to state as to what role DSBD, Department of Small Business Development, is going to do post-COVID. But can I start by saying, even prior to the disaster of the COVID-19, the department had responded to the clarion call by the President of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, that all economic related ministries must ensure the promotion of inclusive growth. And in that inclusive growth, the priority of DSBD became one, youth and those who live with disabilities, irrespective of their age or gender. This we were doing because we know that gender-related matters are also human rights matters. I do agree with the last speaker that we consciously keep this in our mind, that if by any mistake people living with disabilities are left out of any of our programs. But let me quickly go, Chair or Program Director, straight to what are we doing. We found that the people living with disabilities are registered in various departments, whether it's agriculture or whether it's human settlement, etc. All those who want to give service to them, they have this database, including other institutions like your universities, NPOs, and NGOs. It is on that regard that we wanted to establish a national register for all those we are already attempting to either empower them and support them in what they have been doing. I have in mind a group in Mdantsane of young people living with disabilities. They are struggling. They want to have a better machinery so that they can continue with their furniture manufacturing, including school desks. We have also forwarded during this COVID their numbers through the deputy mayor of Buffalo City to the deputy minister of labor and employment, so that they will be considered by the Department of Education when they put out tenders for desk making in order to accommodate the school needs during this period of crisis. Beyond that, those who are actually in textile industry, we have made it a point that we have made a call, and this platform program director enables us to continue with that call, that all those who are actually sewing, we want to ensure that we lobby that they are given a tender so that they can produce the masks, so that they have also a benefit despite them having been locked out. And some of them, if they don't have the skill, if they don't have whatever, we are prepared to organize them into an entity, whether you call it an enterprise or you call it a cooperative. Can I also state that it is very, very critical that we don't consider them only to a particular categories, sewing and so on, though that is important. There is a very important issue. I'm discussing this with the minister, and by this way, I'm not committing the minister, but I think she will like it. She's young, she's a woman, she does care for the poor. That these people, the issue here is the technology, not related to Braille, so that they themselves can participate by modern communication as we do today. Some of them are blind, cannot participate in a conference when there is no Braille. So we are actually saying part of what the minister must allow us to budget for is the making available the Braille. I'm very thankful to see to SITA, because sometimes SITAs, they are actually assisting NGOs. I know one in Mthatha that is providing skills for people living with disabilities. But can I share one painful part through that process was to find that some of them are having premature pregnancies and they look after their own children. They want to look after their own children by all means, and SITA is supporting them a lot. I'm going to this part that says they are human beings. They don't really want to be actually dependent. You know, I really, really want to promote this arrangement that they are confident, they can look after their children, after their household chores, and attend training. And these computers, they are the type of computers they need is indeed a little bit expensive. They won't achieve them. Even their training in these institutions, it also lacks this availability of these specialized computers that will help our people. The fourth industrial revolution, Madam Director, is now. And therefore, we need to go out of our way, but we can't exclude them from urban farming, where they are not, they don't have to travel far, and that they also have to participate in chicken, poultry, egg markets, and so on. And also the easy ways of planting. This is very much exciting to me because I have also studied in other countries. And I can tell you, the professor that was my mentor was disabled and using a wheelchair, but she was able to provide tea for me, give me books, do everything. It is actually my belief, and I've internalized it through training, that they can live independent life. They move with the wheelchair into their own cars. They drive in a car that is actually designed to suit their needs. We are actually after this notion, and we are supported. We are integrating, because what we have learned, honorable guest, was also that COVID has brought integration at a development model. So when the planning is being done, there are work streams for those departments that have got common ground in what they have to serve. Your social development will actually assist us with the database, also what they have already done, so that we can build economically and ensure that there will be no space where they are not seen taking place. I didn't take my time, and I only believe that I'm going to continue with this very topic you gave me, because it is closest to my heart. We are also collaborating with human settlement, so that there's no stage where there is a problem about steps and a slab. And also that safe villages must be part and parcel of our service delivery, where employment places thereby near this particular complex, shopping complex, doctors, etc., and schooling as well, so that this life is made not only conducive to better livelihood, but to further say they live amongst other people. The mainstreaming, Madam Program Director, is now. We don't have to be saying some South Africans are like this, some South Africans are black or white, some are disabled. What is going to these gaps is and integrate is only when we collaborate in a service delivery, so that all needs during planning are actually achieved. Whether it's a school, it's a university, it's a hospital, it must cater for all South Africans, so that you can choose to go where you want to. But the security is the last thing I want to talk about. That many times where they are, you find that some of settlements, even windows don't have burglar proofs, which means it leaves them vulnerable. And also this security technology, that they can press a panic button, that they can be able to do things when someone is breaking in, when they are in and when they feel they are at risk. I am therefore believing strongly that this department will go a long way if within this district development model, we actually collaborate and work intra-department, inside the office of the hierarchy at that level, so that we can share what we have and what their plans are, and also with them very much included at a primary level of development. And also that they shouldn't be put to separate schools. I do argue against that one. We must get used to them, that we are all equals, but we don't have same capacities. Whether they can be more brilliant than I am, but maybe they are constrained because of reaching out physically. That means it's a good combination. It means we need each other like fish and water. I actually appreciate the opportunity given to the department. The minister has been fully informed, is supportive of every other new initiative at a district level. We really want our incubators to have special units set aside at a peri-urban level, at a township level, and at a rural space, so that they are not obliged to go elsewhere when they need whatever education or development. Development in terms of this country, in terms of our constitution, economic inclusiveness, include them fully. And I'm very, very excited having participated and will continue to want to contribute in future organization. I thank the Minister of Women, Children, and people living with disabilities. I actually thank Professor Hlengiwe, with whom we always bounce and talk to, so that when we plan, we never leave that important department, because it is a lead department, but it is there to whip us on track so that we are able to attend to our mandate of including people living with disabilities, being South Africans equally like any other one in the world. I thank you very much.
DG?
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Minister. I'm now going to invite our colleagues from the civil society organizations to then address us, particularly on what disability organizations have done to respond to the need and experiences on the ground, as well as what are the main concerns of persons with disabilities, including their families and their representative organizations. And lastly, what are they proposing for government to take into consideration? I thank you. And the first one that will have to come in is Mr. Lutz Matoto, Disabled People of South Africa. Mr. Matoto, please come in. Mr. Matoto, are you available to address us? If Mr. Matoto is not ready yet, can we take Mr. Jace Nair, South African Disability Alliance?
Program Director, Mr. Matoto is there.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Matoto. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Matoto.
Please check if you are not muted, Mr. Matoto. Colleagues, assist Mr. Matoto.
Mr. Matoto, would have to unmute. Mr. Matoto? The mic button next to your video. Try now. Mr. Matoto, we don't hear you. Please click the unmute.
He's still muted.
Can you try now, Mr. Matoto? Do you hear us?
Sorry, but I'm not sure if
We are fine. We can hear you
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
Mr. Matoto. Yes.
you can hear me now.
Yes, we can. Over to you, Mr. Matoto. Apologies.
Thank you. Sorry that I may not be I'm not going to be using the video since I'm going to be using my phone to talk to. Is that okay?
That's okay. You may proceed.
Okay. Greetings to the Honorable Minister and the two Deputy Ministers, Acting Deputy Director General and government official present, leadership of the disability sector, all protocol observed. We would like to appreciate the invite to present in this very important webinar. The COVID-19 crisis presents an unprecedented challenge to society in general and to disabled people in particular. We acknowledge that there are necessary factors around the risk condition and the lockdown regulations and guidelines as the curve, but I will, however, reflect on the challenges they pose to disabled people, irrespective of these factors being necessary. I do so to illustrate the fact that disabled people are more vulnerable to the impact of the coronavirus and urge government to actually speak with the sector in finding better ways in addressing or responding to the current challenges, including what is now happening. That's why we appreciate this webinar very much. I will also explain that in this presentation, I have left out some of the impact as it relates to psychosocial disability, because one of the realities about the COVID-19 is that it is something that is affecting us for the first time, and therefore we are, as we go along. I'll speak to the risk of transmission first. That the risk of transmission to disabled people is very high, as the virus is found in various surfaces. Disabled people make use of assistive devices that come to contact with the various surfaces, and therefore the likelihood of being in contact with the virus is very high when it comes to disabled people. For example, wheelchair users, when you wheel your wheelchair, obviously it touches the surfaces, including our crutches, your white cane, every aspect about disability speak to us being more vulnerable and prone into getting the virus. So the risk of contamination when it comes to disabled people is very high. Now, yet you would find that in the response conditions, it is very clear the issue of exclusion of disabled people in these various interventions. Now, for example, the intervention on food relief, the disabled people get grants have been excluded on the basis that they get grants, and yet the very grants are not adequate enough in terms of helping poverty of disabled people. So disabled people, irrespective whether you get grant or you don't, you still have the same nutritional needs as other people, because the very grant that you have cannot even maintain your well-being in terms of your assistive devices. Now, what does this expose? Because for me, the COVID-19 is sort of exposes some various deep-seated inequalities in society. The pandemic, the response to the pandemic was a scramble for safety. I always like I have likened it to a flight that's going down. Everybody rush for safety. They even forget the very disabled passenger because everybody is concerned about their own safety. And the only people who will come to the rescue of disabled people in that situation will be the crew that is trained. Now, which is the situation happening? That everybody was rushing to find a proper way to respond. And as a result, the disabled passenger is left behind. Who is that crew member in our instance that will remember that there is a disabled person? For us, we feel strongly that that crew member would be an act, because if there was a disability act, all responses would have been on the basis of that particular act. So a disability act spoke about leaving no one behind. And for us to be able to leave no one behind, we can't rely on human memory. Instead, we need to put systems in place that will speak to making sure that nobody is left behind. And therefore, legislations will help us in responding to such challenges, so that because the COVID-19 challenges are socio-economic challenges. At how it has been positioned or postured in terms of response to disabled people are more seen as consumers of services rather than as both consumers and providers of services. When people think about sanitization, masks, they think of us as consumers rather than providers. We have disabled people who are in the business, in the business sector, who can be able, actually, I have been phoned by many, they have masks, they can't even find a space to provide that service that people procure, because so that they too can benefit on the economic spin-offs of what is currently happening with other sectors. Now, which then brings me to our biggest worry, the post-COVID-19, where there will be still again scramble for resources. The countries, even the world economy, will be at its lowest, meaning that many would have lost livelihoods, they would have lost their jobs. Now, if you do not have an act, how do you achieve equity in providing relief in terms of even businesses, in terms of jobs who are not employed as we speak? How do you then think that after the COVID-19, with all the devastating impact, that in that scramble, there will be a thought left for a disabled person? We will still be at zero. We will be at the beginning of it all. So we are saying that in order for us to be able to make sure that these things happen, let us start now to ensure that disabled people are part of the story. Many disabled people are in need of care. If I move out of the economic aspect of one and then get to issues of social distancing. For example, many disabled people are in need of care and others are in need of assistance, and that is received through PAs and other people who assist them. These people must come to close proximity in order to give the necessary assistance. And an example is a wheelchair user who must be lifted up from a wheelchair, and then transport all of these things, they would need people to come to closer proximity to assist them into the transport system, into getting into transport, which then exposes disabled people vulnerability. For example, if you have somebody who assists you, now you have you also need assistance. Now we all
and finance. Majority of these
If we are still connected.
It's a poor connection by Mr. Matoto. Program director? Program director?
Perhaps we, Shailen, I'm listening.
You are now unmuted.
Okay. Is Mr. Matoto still on? It's a little bit quiet.
He is on. It's a very poor connection. Program director. I recommend we proceed until he comes back. He is on, but it's a poor connection.
That's fine. Can somebody send him a note that we will find a mechanism to also deal with him? And for now, let's allow Mr. Jace Nair from the South African Disability Alliance, noting that he is connecting from a telephone line. That could be a cellular phone line. That could be the reason. Can we then afford Mr. Jace Nair the opportunity to address us from the South African Disability Alliance? Mr. Jace, are you ready?
Good day. Greetings, Madam Minister, Deputy Minister.
To you, Mr. Jace. Proceed.
Greetings, good day to you, Madam Minister, Deputy Minister, the Acting Director General, and officials, leaders of the disability movement in South Africa. Thank you for this opportunity of presenting this webinar. It is long overdue in view of numerous requests made by the sector to meet with the department to address firstly issues of general concern, and since the lockdown, the issues around the national lockdown that affects people with disability. The President in his SONA stressed the importance of an inclusive society and working with people with disabilities to ensure that the rights of persons with disability is considered, and in particular that the Disability Act is prioritized as part of the 6th administration. However, since the national lockdown over 50 days ago, this has had numerous impact on persons with disability. In view of the limited time I have, I'm going to highlight just a few of them. Firstly, we find that the response from government is very fragmented, uncoordinated, and lacks a general consultation. Even though we have the white paper on the rights of persons with disability, this has not been effective since it's not enforceable. We've seen different government departments present separately on disability without mainstreaming disability or using an inclusive approach, the use of universal access. This would not have happened if we had a Disability Act in place. The impact of poverty on persons with disability has been very severe. We know that majority of persons with disability are reliant on the Social Security grant, and in many households, this is the only income that sustains the family. The imposition by the Department of Social Development that persons who receive disability grants do not qualify for the essential packs as well as food packs makes it very harsh on these families. It is evidently clear that the consideration of the study on the economic impact on persons with disability that was undertaken by the Disability Rights Branch a few years ago have not been considered when excluding persons with disability from receiving this essential packs and food packs. The financial sustainability on disabled people's organizations is worsening. The fundings that we used to receive from cooperatives, from various funding agencies based on the provision of services is now drying up because we are unable to provide direct services in many instances. Also, the corporate sector is using its CSI funding for its own survival and have also redirected those funds to government programs and other private sector programs in respect of COVID-19, therefore making these NGOs very vulnerable. We also find that the provisions of the government assistance programs require one to be registered as a company with CIPC, and the majority of DPOs are registered as not-for-profit organizations and are therefore not able to access these relief resources that are available. The DPO sector employs thousands of people in various capacities, providing programs for empowerment as well as services to persons with disability. Their livelihoods are now in jeopardy. The economic impact on persons with disabilities, especially felt with entrepreneurs with disability and those workers who are working at sheltered and protective workshops. They are no longer earning any income and finding it extremely challenging to cope under these very trying circumstances. They are not receiving any support at this stage. Some of the entrepreneurs are registered as corporate or as small businesses. Others have not registered and have not registered their workers under the UIF program and therefore are not qualifying for support in terms of those programs. The impact on learners with special needs. When the announcement of the closing of these schools were made, our learners were sent home without any learner-teacher support materials, without accessible textbooks or readers, without any assistive devices like writing machines or reading equipment. They do not have access at home to data or technology, because the majority of our learners come from the low economic communities. So they are unable to access all the e-learning platforms that currently exist. The concerns that we've raised with the Department of Education include that there needs to be some intervention for learners whilst they are away from school. There also needs to be programs in place to ensure that when our learners return to school, that the issues around the assistive devices, the issues around social distancing are ensured. Our particular concerns are around the learners who need to live in hostels. Many of the school hostels, the infrastructure is very unsatisfactory. In general circumstances, it did not allow for adequate distancing between beds where the children live. There are children that are overcrowded in hostels, and this imposes serious concerns around transmission and risks to learners, to staff at these institutions. The issue around transport for learners. Learners live in different provinces and attend schools away from their provinces. And therefore, there is a need to look at how will these learners get to these schools. There are certain facilities that close their hostel on a Friday and reopen their hostel on a Sunday. What attention is going to be provided to ensure for the safe transport of these learners? The next item is the lack of accessible publications. The National Institute of Occupational Health provided for the information leaflet on the coronavirus, which Blind SA transcribed into Braille, into DAISY, into audio, and circulated widely. Apart from that, there is no other accessible material in Braille or DAISY that is provided to blind, visually impaired, and other print disabled persons. The government publications are in print and it is not accessible. Particularly the regulations and policy documents that you're circulating for comment is also not provided in an accessible format, and blind people find it very difficult to make inputs into those programs. And then, of course, the lack of recognition of NGOs. NGOs are close to the ground and are in constant contact with communities, particularly people with disabilities and their needs. But there hasn't been adequate recognition of the role that the NGOs are playing during this COVID crisis. There is a need for partnerships with the sector. These are some of the recommendations that we provide. That there should be a task team that consists of experts from the disability sector to provide input to the work streams and to government on issues affecting persons with disability during COVID-19 as well as post-COVID-19 recovery. There needs to be greater partnerships between government and the NGO sector so that effective service delivery can be made. In view of the fragmented approach to disability by government departments at all spheres of government, national, provincial, and local, the need for the mainstreaming of disabilities to be written in the directions of regulations and policies is absolutely urgent and critical and must involve the disability sector's input. The call is made that the need for the Disability Act is prioritized so that it would provide the basis for holding duty bearers legally accountable to ensure that there is effective service delivery to persons with disability. And then we say that there needs to be an urgent reprioritization of government programs to ensure disability inclusion and that there is adequate provision made for the inclusion of all disability services in all government programs, all government departments, at all spheres of government. These concerns and recommendations has been brought together by SADA, the South African Disability Alliance, which is an alliance of 22 national disabled people's organizations, service organizations, parents organizations, and professional bodies. It provides a range of services to tens of thousands of people with disability throughout the country. These issues that we raise are being raised on behalf of people with disabilities in our country. Now during this national lockdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, we say that no one should be left behind, and especially persons with disability must be adequately included in all policies, legislation, in all service delivery, and must be consulted. Nothing about us without us. I thank you for giving us this opportunity, and we look forward to receiving the responses from government on the concerns and the recommendations that we make, and to engage with government so that the needs of people with disabilities is adequately addressed in all your activities. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jace Nair. Your inputs have been noted and we will deal with those appropriately when we engage the relevant government departments. I will then invite Ms. Lisa Aziz, representing the Presidential Working Group on Disability. Ms. Lisa. Ms. Lisa is our last speaker.
Director, just advising Lisa to connect her mic, connect audio. Program Director.
Let me assist them quickly, Shailen, okay?
Yeah. Program Director, do you hear me?
Let me assist Lisa. Let me assist Lisa quickly. I see her.
Lisa, we hear you now. Can you test, please? Can you? Lisa, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Lisa, please, you may proceed. We hear you.
Thank you for setting up this platform to hear the voice of persons with disability. To date, inclusive practices within government, and now specifically the COVID-19 National Command Center, has been questionable. So this engagement as a first step is pivotal to create equity and access in the time of pandemic and post-pandemic. The limited awareness and understanding of disability issues as one of the most marginalized sectors contributes to a response that has been piecemeal and uncoordinated. In addition, building departmental capacity is critical to changing the status quo. To date, there has been no prioritization of mechanisms to guarantee the participation and safeguarding of all members of the population. Further, our people have not been enabled and empowered to access the various supports that government has provided in the time of COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected all people. However, persons with disabilities, especially those in rural areas of South Africa, and older people, being the most vulnerable, have been disproportionately affected. The sector has especially felt aggrieved that issues on disability have not been adequately placed on the table, and that all departments were not on board in ensuring that the voice of people with disabilities have been heard. There's not been equitable access to services. And together with my colleagues in the Presidential Working Group, I would like to highlight the following. One, the economic impact on persons with disabilities during the time of lockdown has been dire. A study undertaken by government has proven that persons with disabilities are more vulnerable to poverty. The cost of disability to persons with disabilities is high. In addition, most people with disabilities remained in the informal economy and have been unable to earn a living during this time. Those who do own small business and enterprises are experiencing difficulties in accessing the support packages offered by government. The through line of success for economic empowerment of our people includes improving educational institutions and schooling across the life cycle of our people with autism. Two, the disproportionate and alarming mental health impact of lockdown on persons with disabilities and their families. Whilst there has been no studies on this, for those of us who work on the ground, we see the levels of crisis many of our families are in, with many psychiatrists and psychologists, that is those who can access these health services, indicating the high numbers of patients being diagnosed with anxiety and depression. For example, 8 autism NGOs and DPOs have been advocating for relaxation of some lockdown regulations to allow our people with autism, or autistic people as they like to be referred to be allowed to exercise. Their routine has been disrupted, and research has proven that this helps calm their central nervous systems. Numerous letters have been sent to various departments and have not been acknowledged. Whilst the COCTA Level 4 regulations have offered some reprieve, this has not been adequate. To us, this shows a genuine lack of understanding of the autistic community and their needs. Persons with disabilities remain invisible, and this has been exacerbated by the lockdown. The impact of COVID-19 lockdown restrictions on children with disabilities, that is, the limited access to nutrition, access to caregivers, access to stimulation and toys has been huge. UNICEF reports that children living in institutions are particularly at risk. For children with disabilities, there's been an added risk of abuse, violence, and neglect as households are under increased pressure and isolated from their usual support networks. And with the closure of schools during lockdown, children with disabilities who are already excluded from education are at risk of being even further left behind. In addition, the huge inequities and access to virtual learning platforms to the majority of children with disabilities have become glaringly apparent during the lockdown. 4, persons with disabilities, the majority of whom are women, are at greater risk of violence, particularly because of the isolation. This data is not available in terms of numbers of women and girls with disabilities that are impacted during lockdown, but a concerted effort must be made to ensure the protection of women and girls with disabilities against gender-based violence, impacting specifically those with intellectual disabilities and psychosocial disabilities, as well as persons with albinism. 5, transport for persons with disabilities during lockdown is a huge challenge for the sector. Ideally, older persons and persons with disabilities as high-risk persons should be able to access support in their homes. However, in reality, we know this is not and will not be the case. Many persons with disabilities are forced to use public transport to access their medication and essential services. For single parents with children with disabilities, there has been an added risk of taking their children with them to get essential supplies. Persons with disabilities are simply not prioritized in the public transport network. 6, information to accessible formats. We acknowledge the work government has done to ensure that all news reporting includes sign interpreting. However, a large proportion of the disability sector has been excluded from information, education, and communication on COVID-19. This includes a lack of access to online educational material for learners with hearing loss. No captions are provided, presenting difficulties for learners with hearing to access online learning. To include alternative augmentative learning platforms for learners with autism, as well as simple graphics and large print for learners with intellectual impairments. News in the time of pandemic should be available to all citizens on an equal basis. We therefore request that captions during all news bulletins, including presidential and ministerial briefings, be provided as a matter of urgency. This is our recommendations. 1, there is an urgent need for legal statute for inclusion. And whilst we have PEPUDA, this does not effectively address the needs of persons with disabilities. The sector has been strongly lobbying for the finalization and promulgation of the Disability Act, which will ensure the inclusion of persons with disabilities across all levels of government and society at large. Civil society groups, specifically DPOs, should have been engaged right at the outset on strategies to combat COVID-19 to ensure that no one was left behind. Their perspectives in the analysis of risk factors would have developed an increased government capacity to respond to the sector. There is also a strong need to develop an integrated strategy, provincial and district level and local level, including monitoring and reporting on disability inclusion. In addition, the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities must increase human resource capacity to respond to the needs of the disability sector. There is presently no deputy DG for the disability sector, and this needs to be rectified immediately. 2, the establishment of a technical team as recommended by the Presidential Working Group in 2019 with clear terms of reference, resources to function, and clear guidelines as to how it will work with the Presidential Working Group and other disability stakeholders is of absolute importance to ensure the economic empowerment of persons with disabilities. Women with disabilities experience higher levels of unemployment, and therefore responses to unemployment in the country needs to be gender and disability sensitive. 3, through the partnerships with DPOs and NGOs and government departments like DSD and the Department of Health and local municipalities, the identification of children with disabilities and persons with disabilities who are at higher risk, example, those who are immunocompromised and living with comorbidities, be identified and provided with the necessary support. For example, municipal staff in lockdown could have been engaged to support persons with disabilities through virtual means, such as or by telephone or WhatsApp check-ins to ensure that they were all right and to provide necessary service where needed. 4, transport for persons with disabilities. Government to ensure that dedicated transport facilities are available through partnerships with NGOs and DPOs, as well as other departments which could facilitate this. Example, South African Police Services, the Army, etc. Bus services such as RIA, VIA, My City, etc. These services should have skilled staff. Persons with disabilities have struggled to get demarcated areas at the taxi ranks, interchanges, and train stations. We need a priority system at bus stops and transport interchanges where older persons and passengers with disabilities are given priority by marshals, so they don't have to queue, and where social distancing is obviously questionable in those environments. The department should understand the risk of hospitalization overwhelming the healthcare system, which is just exacerbated by not providing our people with this special protection. I would also advise the establishment of academic research and disaggregated data to support our needs immediately during COVID-19 and to track the impact of the lockdown on our persons with disability. Finally, all measures implemented must be aligned with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. COVID-19 has highlighted the urgent need to fast-track the domestication of this international treaty more than ever to ensure the human rights and dignity of our persons with disabilities. I thank you.
Vato, you should be in.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lisa, for your input. And now I'm going to open this session for questions and response from government. So if there is anyone from the government who wants to make an input based on what the presenters have made around what they are expecting from government, DM, if you can respond, the Department of Social Development, I know you are available, education, so anyone from government who wants to respond, please indicate so that I can identify you. DM, can I start with you? Shalom, as the host, is the DM still on?
Yes, Mabato. Professor Mkhize, DM Mkhize is on. Deputy Minister Kappa seems to have been disconnected.
Okay. And then colleagues from the Department of Health, Education, and DSD, any one of them can indicate if they want to make any inputs based on the comments that were done for government.
Thank you, Program Director. They would have to indicate via the chat if they would like to say something, then I would be able to bring them up. We have Ms. Sandhya Singh from Health, who seems to be trying to come in.
Okay.
So I've brought Ms. Singh in.
All right. Ms. Singh, you can go ahead if you are connected now. I think she's also struggling.
Yes, apologies, Mabato. She says that we can't hear me. We cannot hear her. Perhaps Deputy Minister can come in. Deputy Minister Mkhize.
Deputy Minister Mkhize, can you please come in if you are able to, while we are still connecting Ms. Singh from Department of Health?
Deputy Minister.
Are you able to assist her?
From my side, seems she's trying to connect with video, and it seems the signal might be poor. I got an indication that she'd like to respond. I think she's still struggling. We are struggling with both Ms. Singh and Deputy Minister Mkhize.
I'm also told that colleagues from DBE and DSD are present. Can they also indicate if they'll be able to respond?
Of course we have money. Give me a time and location. I promise you, no please.
I think
Who is on the screen now?
I think Ms. Singh should be able to speak right now. Ms. Singh?
There was a gentleman on, I don't know from which department.
Mr. Jabulani Kobo.
Department of Basic Education.
Yes, can you go ahead, Jabulani? Can you go ahead while you are sorting Ms. Singh?
Yes, I would like to first the minister, the deputy minister, the head of department, and all the leadership of the department. And thanks for the invitation to the webinar. It's quite important for the Department of Basic Education. And I've taken note of the issues as part of our work with DBE. And I would like to say, I think in respect of the issues, I think what happened was that the challenges that were brought about by COVID-19 created some challenges within the system in terms of how we continuously provide basic education. But also it provided opportunities for us to see where there were gaps and deal with those gaps. Let me say that maybe because there were issues that were raised, one of the major issues within the department has been that of social distancing, which I think is a matter that is key to make sure that it's one of the things that we deal with. I think from a perspective of special schools for learners with disabilities and special care centers, what we have
I think your signal is becoming weaker. We're losing you now. Okay, continue.
Gobo?
Hello? I think we've lost DBE. Can they try to
Find
reconnect?
the guidelines
Oh.
to make sure that the guidelines. Yes.
Yes, continue. Continue. Yeah, continue.
Yes, and in order to refine the guidelines, because there is a huge diversity within the learner population in the special schools. In other words, you will see a school, but there's a huge diversity. You've got learners who are blind, learners who are deaf, learners with autism. I think these categories have been mentioned here. So what we've done is, from the Department of Basic Education perspective, is that working with civil society, we've set up specific task teams to look at guidelines to assist schools when schools reopen. So we've set aside we've established, for instance, a task team for providing guidelines for schools for the blind, for instance, and Mr. Nair is part of the panel. He knows about this, but we've set aside, we've established such task teams to look at the finer details of providing guidance to schools, to make sure that learners and teachers and support staff are safe. So we've set up various task teams to look at various issues. We've got a task team also that's looking at schools for the deaf, learners with autism, but also looking at the occupational therapy, the support staff, and the guidelines as to how they should be dealt with. But I think also, in respect of safety and security, we are also looking at ensuring that we redefine the safety, because what we've done is we are looking at the challenges brought about by the pandemic and our responses, not only as a short-term measure that ends here, but looking beyond what needs to happen, because some of the challenges that have been highlighted are challenges that we have to deal with anyway. There was also an issue around subtitles for deaf learners. Let me assure you that the department is working closely is working closely with the sector to ensure that there are subtitles. I must indicate that the cause of this was that the materials that we were using online were materials that were developed before the pandemic, but the department is working on making sure that this is corrected. The issue of the closing and the opening of the closing of the hostels during the weekend, and the learners that attend schools from other provinces, these are issues that the task teams that I've referred to are looking into. And the issue of large print that's been raised, we have had to relook at our online materials, and we are currently working on an initiative that is going to be announced soon in respect of making sure that all our materials are accessible to all learners. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Alberto?
Hi, Nelisi, are you on?
You are in?
Yes, yes, Helen?
You are audible to everyone?
Should I do what?
You are audible to everyone. Ms. Nkobo just concluded.
Yes. I'm saying now, I thank Mr. Jabulani. And I'm now calling Nelisiwe from DSD to make an input.
Okay.
Ms. Nelisiwe, do you hear us? Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead.
Singwe Vilagazi from the Department of Social Development. We would like to thank the department very much and the sector for organizing this beautiful seminar. It is very informative and it came at the right time because it is important that as South Africans we indicate the importance of how we respond to COVID-19 in relation to persons with disabilities. I must indicate that Program Director, that as the Department of Social Development, we have come up with relevant directives after the country was declared to level 4 to ensure that also persons with disabilities are given the priority and attention that they deserve. What is important, I think it's important to indicate that we came up with something like, you remember initially we were saying no visitors will be allowed during the lockdown period. But then when the country came to level 4, we said persons with disabilities can be visited, those that are in residential care facilities. And we also said that persons with disabilities could be released as well. And that each person, if he is to be released from a facility, must also be screened and before he is released. And also the family where the person is going to go to must also be screened to ensure that there is no one who can then be a threat or a risk in relation to the person with disabilities, indicating the importance of having social workers playing a key role there in terms of their report and the recommendation and so on. So as part of the precautionary measures, also as the department, we also ensured that there are safety measures that are put in place just to ensure that persons with disabilities are protected. We came up with the implementation of the protocols, like for example, the issues of washing of hands and so on. We're working very much closely with our provinces, the districts, in ensuring that we provide care packages like sanitizers, mask, protective clothing to the number of quite a number of facilities that we have across the country. And for persons with disabilities requiring services from care attended caregiver, the following measures were applied. For example, provincial teams could be contacted to acquire permit on behalf of the care attendant, ensuring that care attendants have not traveled to an affected area, and that caregivers, they must also have the facilities a backup team in instances where a caregiver is not well, so that some alternate measures are put in place. And lastly, Chairperson, I must indicate that we work very much closely with the provinces, the districts, as well as the local teams. And we've come up with a document which is assist us in terms of collecting data and ensuring that the data is disaggregated on persons with disabilities receiving services from different service providers, especially social development. The data also include the number of caregivers that are available and different services that are provided and number of facilities that are being serviced. In addition to that, the disaggregated data is maintained by the department in terms of the COVID-19 response team in order to ensure that there is a coordinated reporting system. We have also ensured that persons with disabilities receive information during this critical time. For example, gender. Remember when COVID-19 started,
we had a challenge that there is quite a high number of incidences of gender-based violence that we experience, and even through our command center, which offers a toll-free number. But we have also ensured that even persons with disabilities are able to access that number, even if through an SMS baseline, where persons with disabilities can also access the number. I thank you, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelisiwe. I think I've got another person who wants to respond to make an input from the Department of Social Development, Mr. Chris Shunmogen. Can you, Shalon, put him on also to make his input?
Thank you, Maite. Chris is in.
Hi, Chris. You can go ahead.
But Chris is in. Perhaps he's not.
Chris, can you unmute your machine so that we can hear you? While we still waiting for Chris, I've got WhatsApp messages that also I'm going to put to everybody from government to respond, including our DM. The first question relates to a mother who was arrested with a child with multiple disabilities, was arrested on the 23rd of April on her way to buy nappies for her 9-year-old child, and is to appear in court. So she can't get a permit to be able to go buy more, currently assist. So I think that's number one. The second one is around subtitling. There's a person with disability who's saying she or he cannot follow. Yes, he does see the interpreter, but there are no subtitles, so they feel excluded. Another question goes to Department of Small Business. What will happen after developing the disability database? What is the intended plan? Then I've got a question around schools. Children with dyslexia are missing a lot of information during COVID-19. So will the department or any other school be able to help them as they are at home? Another question goes to delivering of medications. Why are there no plans in place in delivering medication for people with disabilities from their local clinics and hospitals, as opposed to have them being exposed to the virus by venturing into these public spaces? And I think the last one, it's a question that during lockdown, institutions for assistive devices should also be regarded as essential services, because the people with disabilities need repairs and maintenance for wheelchairs, as the services was not available. Yeah, those are the questions that I have thus far. Now, who's going to respond now? Who do we have?
Thanks.
While they're still there, and I've got another question. How ready are the staff members from daycare centers and protective workshops in terms of accommodating people with disabilities when time comes for them to start working? Considering the routine of autistic children, how is it going to be managed in these centers? And the last question is not even a question, it's a suggestion that information on permits for caregivers and personal assistants should be sent to SAPS and the Army, because they are still turning away parents who request the forms to be stamped and signed. Do you have anybody, or can we ask the DM now to respond?
Mabato, DM indicated that she'll sum up, she'll respond when it comes to the summary, please. Thank you.
Okay. DBE, social development.
Yes. DBE. DBE.
Basic education.
Yes.
Yes, can you go ahead?
Yes, there was one question around children with dyslexia that are missing a lot during this time.
Yes.
I'm guessing that this time means during the lockdown.
Yes.
Yes. It's an area that we are looking at, but I would like to request that we after this this webinar we connect with that particular person that raised the comment, because it's quite an important comment that we'd like to collaborate with them and to see how we can do. We're already working, but we'd like them to be part of what we're doing.
Okay.
I think that's that. And then the other one that implied us is the routine on autistic children. We already have a task team that's working on that.
All right. Okay. Thank you, DBE. DSD, anyone who wants to continue or comment?
Mabato?
Hi, Shalin.
I think we have Ms. Nadia Singh from Health who has managed. I just saw a video pop up. If she's able to unmute.
Hi, Nadia. Please come in, unmute and make input. Missy? Are you able to help Shalin? Missing? I think she's still struggling, Shalin.
Yes, Mabato, hopefully we can get her audio in. Currently, she is struggling to connect with the audio.
Oh, okay. DSD, is there any question that you want to respond before? Because after I'm missing, I'm going to give it to the DM now to summarize and round up. Unfortunately, this is technology. Sometimes it has this. So if they can't connect, I would suggest that they make those inputs in writing, and they will be shared with the sector, because they were participating, but unfortunately, technology sometimes does this.
Mabato, we see if Deputy Minister is able to come in.
Because I want the Deputy Minister now to close, so there will not be other questions after her. So if people can't connect now, I'm suggesting let them make those inputs in writing, and when the team is doing the report, they will also send the answers to everybody, so that everybody knows what the government is doing in terms of intervention. So if they can't connect, then you're going to ask the DM to do the closing remarks, and then and closing, sir. Deputy Minister?
Mabato, just give me a moment to bring in DM, please.
Okay.
I will indicate.
And everyone who's sending questions, even those questions on WhatsApp, they will be answered properly, and they will be part of the report that you going to get of the webinar. Each and every question will be answered, and you'll get it with the report for the webinar.
Mabato, Deputy Minister is in. Deputy Minister.
Hi,
Yes.
Deputy Minister, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I will be brief. Firstly, I would like to thank you for helping us with the Q&A, but also the previous program director before you. She did a good job.
Yes.
Gave all of us an opportunity to make our humble contribution. I must also say we're grateful to the input that was made by Minister Maite Nkoana-Mashabane, in the sense that she accounted at the highest level as to all the national processes that are taking place, the monitoring mechanisms, the inclusion systems of persons with disability. And I think the emphasis of some guiding principles which have been endorsed by the sector itself over a long period of time, like nothing about us without us. On the side, also, I would like to thank Innocentia Mkhize, who from the Center for Human Rights, for sharing with us the global survey that they are working on. And I think it's a very, very important one, in the sense that it's looking at all aspects of inclusion and access during this critical period, the COVID-19, where we all say we have no lessons to go by. It's a new era for all of us. And so the work they are doing, we hope we'll get the report, as Ms. Mkhize have said, that it will be online. There'll be a lot to learn from it. But coming to specifics, I think the UN policy chief, Jan Fokwa, reminded us of a document that we've all been really, we've learned a lot from the report that was issued by the UN Secretary General, reminding us of a right-centered approach to saying no to discrimination and promotion of inclusion, but also the importance of data in this kind of work. And while I'm on that program director, because I'm trying to take 5 minutes, I think even the responses we've got from sister departments, it's important that we get a very concrete briefing in terms of where they say we've made sure that schools have PPEs, and they are specific in terms of the province and the region, and then at a local level, the school itself. Because I think what seems to be a challenge is these contradictions where everybody will say, oh, we have an inclusive rights approach, we are doing everything. But concretely, people who are affected, they will tell you a different story. So it will help us a lot to get a very concrete report or reports from different departments. Honorable Kappa is always an asset to us, because even in cabinet, she brings the Deputy Minister of Small Business. She brings a rural perspective. And even today, I think we appreciate what she said. And I'm sure many of the questions, they pertain to what small business is supposed to do. And we hope to continue to engage in her, so that we make sure that the rights of persons with disability are not an afterthought, especially when it comes to business support, the set-asides, when they are determined that our sector is in the center. Mr. Matoto, thank you very much. But I must say, you know, the articulation of the risks and possible exclusion. I mean, he used a very powerful examples of a flight landing in an emergency that nobody will think about persons with disability. But I really want to assure you that so much has been done in terms of our commitments that many of our people, those who will be sitting next to a person with a disability, they will be conscious of the need to support your neighbor. But I'm grateful that you have highlighted the risk and the fears of persons with disability, and of course the importance of legislation. Mr. Heisner raised quite a number of issues, which one cannot. I've had an opportunity of looking at what he has submitted to us as a department. I think we need to pick up the recommendations, like the importance of legislation, the economic impact, and how learner support should be tackled, and the task team of experts to advise or to work side by side with us has been noted. We will be following up on all these recommendations as a department, because it's bringing us all closer. The timing is perfect in the sense that from the 1st of April, the sector, the disability division, moved from social development and is now incorporated within the department. Ms. Aziz, we really appreciate the concerns in terms of all the items. I'm not going to go through them, but we've noted them. And I think with regard to the Presidential Working Committee on Disability Issues, the Minister and myself, we would really appreciate an opportunity just to, during your sitting, to sit in and so as to engage further on this. We haven't had an opportunity to make a courtesy call to your meeting, but we'll really appreciate that. And all the recommendations, some touching on what have been said already, but also emphasizing the importance of prioritizing persons with disability in rural areas. And so I think also what is important for me as an outcome of this is that we cannot work in a fragmented fashion. We have to work in a coordinated, coherent manner. So this webinar has lived up to that as far as I'm concerned. It had input from the minister, myself, and the Deputy Minister of Small Business and other government officials interacted. But above everything, the leadership of the sector was clear and unambiguous, is the kind of social compact that the President has been continuously calling for, that to achieve speedily our objectives, we have to work in partnership. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Everybody who's participating, that all the questions that you have sent are going to be answered. There are tons and tons of questions that are coming now, and that maybe shows that we need another interaction, another dialogue going forward in engaging more with the sector and ensuring that we together move along in addressing issues that affect people with disabilities. So in those words, DM, because we indicated in the beginning that the minister is attending another meeting, so your words are the last word, and the webinar is officially closed. Looking forward to engaging with the sector forward. Thank you very much.